Am I on? Am I on? Thank you, Paul, very much indeed. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. A very, very warm welcome to Innovation Zero's Finance and Reporting Forum. My name is Fred Brown. I am a partner at Oliver Wyman, which is a management consulting firm, and I'm the COO of our 3D carbon accounting service, which is part of our climate and sustainability practice. In fact, I was born not far from here. I lived on Holland Road as a kid, which is just around the corner, and I love Olympia, so it's really a great pleasure to welcome you to a part of London I kind of call my own. Would you believe this is the first Innovation Zero conference? Isn't that amazing? There's people here from over 40 countries, so I think we should start off by giving Alec and all the people who made this happen a really big round of applause. A lot of them backstage. Well, I mean, brilliant. Well done, Alec. It's what a fantastic achievement it really is, and wonderful to be here with you all. I'm particularly glad that you've joined this finance and reporting forum because I think the combination of the two has never been more important. You know, we always talk about you can't manage what you can't measure, and finance, of course, plays a very large part in this idea of double materiality. You know, needing to understand the climate risks that businesses face, and also to finance the transition. So actually, we welcome the regulatory requirements, which is turning this sort of voluntary reporting into mandatory. But let's remember, there's a lot of work to be done. We produced at Oliver Wyman a report with the CDP back in February, and it noted that up to 40% of outstanding Europe corporate loans, around 1.8 trillion euros, are financing companies that are showing limited progress to align with 1.5 degrees. And only a quarter of leading companies are actually capable of assessing the alignment of their operating expenses, capital spending, and their revenues with that pathway. 13%, just 13% of companies have assessed the impact of their up and downstream value chain on biodiversity. But I think what's going to make the biggest difference is innovation. I started my career as an industrial designer. I worked on some of the first mobile phones back in the 90s and the tail end of Polaroid cameras. Anyone remember Polaroid cameras? Remember Polaroid cameras? Only £30. Remember those things? Great. Great for parties. But it was when I worked in aircraft design, I worked on the Airbus A380 and various other jets, that I really learned that the biggest breakthroughs come when we partner with others. And we've got a lot of work to do there too. And I love cars. Cars are my passion. Do you know only 11% of car companies are collaborating with their suppliers to help them transition to low carbon operations? So today, I really encourage you to look around you, look at the people around you, look at the person sat next to you, ask them what they do, ask how your firm could partner with their firm to take another step towards solving the problems that face us all. So to our talks. Firstly, a huge thank you to our sponsors. I think Alec would agree, he's the CFO, aren't you, of this organization? Sponsors are good, aren't they, right? We need sponsors, we like sponsors. Carbon Responsible is 4 sponsors of this forum. I think Carbon Responsible's one's, EcoAct is another, Supercritical is a third, and it says here Oliver Wyman is another sponsor, and here's me thinking I'm here on merit. It reminds me of when my dog won Best Eyes in Show, which was nothing to do with us providing the main prize and him not opening his eyes at all. So anyway, right, the format of the day, we've got 6 45-minute panels. So it's like a marathon, not a sprint. Stay with us, stay with us. I'm going to be the kind of Graham Norton, I think, of the situation. I'm going to be with you backstage to sort of steer you through, but we've got some amazing panels with world-class moderators. So we start, let's by giving a massive Innovation Zero welcome to the moderator of our first panel, is Professor Ramanananda. Now, Professor Ramanananda has, I think, the coolest business title I think I've ever seen. He's the academic lead for the Institute for Deep Tech Entrepreneurship. Doesn't that sound cool? At the Imperial College Business School, which of course is one of our fine institutions. So maybe I can hand over to you, Professor. Give him a warm welcome.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. It's really good to see a nice group of you here this morning. So this panel is, my name is Ramanananda. This panel that is going to be speaking to you today is really focused on thinking about the role that the academic sector can play in addressing some of the gaps in the innovation journey, particularly as they relate to climate and deep tech. So as we think about where innovation occurs in large companies, it's financed by obviously the private sector, by the government, by the university sector. But if we look over the last 20 or so years, there's been a marked decline in the amount of fundamental R&D that is being undertaken by large companies, and that's particularly true as it pertains to more radical innovations that are often less likely to come out of large companies and more likely to come out of new startups. Okay? So if we think about the role of the universities that are crucibles of a lot of this fundamental R&D and innovation, in many ways it's always been important, but it's even more important today, given the fact that the complementary source of ideas, which are large companies, have been pulling back on that fundamental research. Now, of course, universities are good at doing research, historically have not been as good at translation, and that's a grand challenge in its own right. There's a multitude of factors that drive that. Some have to do with the university, some have to do with finance. So if we think about venture capital, which is the most important source of finance for radical innovations out there in the world, over the period 2010 2020, global venture capital grew from about $50 billion a year to $250 billion a year, so a five-fold increase. All of that increase essentially came from information technology, software, consumer products and services, business products and services, and financial services. So that's not to say these are not important innovations. It's just to say that there's a lot of challenges that we face in the world that can't be solved by information technology alone, and that we need models to try to figure out how to get those ideas financed. And part of what we at Imperial are thinking a lot about is the role that the university can play in being a key player in not just being the source of ideas, but in helping that translation and getting it to the point where the ideas can be commercializable and funded by investors. I'll just give you a brief. So many of you might know Imperial, but what I find particularly special about I've now been at Imperial 4 years. What I find particularly special is the fact that it's a dedicated and focused university with only 4 faculties: engineering, natural sciences, medicine, and business. And so when it comes to being able to both conceptualize, think about, and try to address some of the problems that we face around climate, Imperial has been a real leader. And our goal is to both talk a little bit about what it is that we're doing, showcase some examples, and then also talk about some of the challenges that we all face as an academic sector in trying to address these gaps. In terms of the research, we have 4 faculties, as I mentioned. There's these Global Challenge Institutes that are cross-faculty collaborations. The Grantham Institute for Climate Change is the very important Global Challenge Institute that we have at Imperial. And then there's a number of support systems of taking that research and turning it into companies. One is the Institute for Deep Tech Entrepreneurship that was set up to support IP-heavy companies that are mostly driven by PIs, professors who have labs at Imperial. And then there's a variety of support programs to help students who are engaged in engaging with climate challenges. So what I'm going to do first is to turn over to my 4 distinguished panelists and request them to give a little introduction on the companies that they are building, what is the problem that they're trying to address, and then speak just a little bit about their role through their personal journey, the role that Imperial played, some of the things that we might learn, what we can do better, and then we'll build from that and start a discussion. I understand that there's going to be a QR code that will come up here, and if you have questions, please just use that to type them in, and I will have the questions come here, and I will use that as a way to build in the conversation so that we can all benefit from your thoughts as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam first to tell us about Ceratec, and then we'll take it from there. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you very much. So hi everyone, I'm Sam Draper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ceratec, and essentially what we're doing is harnessing the power of carbon sequestration and utilization to make carbon negative cement and other sustainable building products. So my entrepreneurial journey really started at Imperial. I met my co-founder while we were doing PhDs in the Department of Civil Engineering, and things have really sort of gone from there. So that was about 2 years ago we started developing our technology. After noticing this sort of overlap between our areas of expertise, if you like, so it's something that's very, as a result of the environment at the university, trying to get people to collaborate in that sort of way. And also it was a bit of a product of COVID where we couldn't go out or go to the pub or anything, so we spent way too much time in the office. So from them, as I said, we've developed our technology predominantly still in the labs at Imperial, so working with the professors there and also getting some sort of industry contributions as well. The two main sort of strands of support that we've had are through Undaunted, so this is through the Grantham Institute that Romana was mentioning. They have an accelerator program called the Greenhouse for early stage climate tech companies. So we spent a 12-month program with them, get a small amount of non-dilutive funding as well to start sort of looking at the commercial aspects of things. And then we were also involved in the DT Prime scheme. So this is part of that Deep Tech Institute that Romana heads. And as he said, it's looking to sort of invest sort of sizable amounts of money. So I think we got just under £200,000 from that. Into startups from university staff where the university does have that direct interest as well. So it makes sense for sort of everyone to benefit from that. That has recently come to an end, and now we're looking to really sort of finalise our spin out from the university, and then in the next 6 months we'll be getting our own premises and going on to sort of scale up production, knowing that we've done loads of the de-risking and the technical development and optimization work within the university.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Filippo. I'm currently a student at Imperial, and my job is to get more students to become like Sam and like my fellow panelists, so founders in climate tech. Basically, we are running a pre-accelerator, which is an accelerator that gets students from year 1 undergraduate to last year PhDs, and pairs them up with a support network of experienced mentors who are serial entrepreneurs in climate tech, and connects them to the investment ecosystem here in the UK. So with the major climate funds and accelerators to then bring their idea to the next level. The problem that we are trying to solve is that usually is only a small percentage of wannabe founders that actually become so. And the reason for this is because universities that don't really incentivize entrepreneurship, in the sense that when you're a student, it's easy to be influenced by the career option that you are offered. And if you're not offered an entrepreneurship career option as a valuable path and not a path for psychopaths who risk not having a life, then you're never gonna choose that path. So we are trying to get people who would otherwise follow more established career paths to engage in building a climate tech startup. And by doing this, we connect them to the network so that they can, when they want, build their own startup more easily.
And Filippo, you want to talk a little bit about what are some of the ideas that are coming out? You've been very impressed by the multitude of ideas that are coming.
Absolutely. So this was our first year, and it was an exceptional year. We accepted around 70 founders, and these are people from across UK and the US. We currently have 14 startups coming out of our program next week. And to give you some examples, we have companies that are working in soil health, companies that are developing carbon negative paint that's alive, that can be painted on buildings and can capture CO2. And we also have companies developing new forms of renewable energy. So we have all the different spectrums, and we are really excited about the climate impact that this company can bring.
Wonderful. Liv.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name's Olivia, and I'm the co-founder of Planera. Planera is a material technology company that was founded to remove permanent waste from your household, but also the planet. So how do we do that? With our material technologies, what we do is we develop multi-purpose technologies. So a single material technology that can be applied across geographies and across markets. So our first technology that we've developed is called Flush Tech, and that we've applied into period products. So this is a fully flushable pad and wrapper, but we look to extend this across incontinence, across baby products, and across household products to remove the amount of permanent waste that we're sending to landfills and incinerators. The reason that we started this company was not only to tackle the environmental waste, but I think a lot of the two main drivers behind it. One is that the products that are being currently designed are asking a lot out of our consumers. They're pushing the burden of sustainable use and disposal onto you as the consumer, asking you to figure out what is the best way to use and dispose of my product. I don't believe that onus should be on you. Companies designing and creating products should be careful and thoughtful about the environment that you're in when you're finished using these products and making it as easy as possible for you to do the right thing. And making the right thing and the easy thing the same thing is what we're striving to do. The second part that we're working hard at Planera is also working with regulators. I believe a lot of this disinformation and a lot of these consumer behaviors have been pushed forward by a lot of this thinking where there are lots of unregulated terms. For example, flushable is not a regulated term. So therefore, you're getting a lot of these commercial products coming onto the market that are clouding the space around sustainability. What is biodegradability? What are natural ingredients? What does organic mean in terms of sustainability? And so a big part of what we're trying to do is work with regulators and local governments to try and ensure that we can bring in the right regulatory sort of pathways and frameworks to allow other sustainable companies to grow as well.
And Olivia, you're an alum. You were
yes.
in the Faculty of Medicine. You want
Yes.
to talk a little bit about
Of
your
course.
journey through Imperial?
Yes, so I started, I was a medic at Imperial. I did the medical course and I graduated in 2017. I ended up working in the NHS for a couple of years, but in my penultimate year at Imperial, I ended up entering, there was an entrepreneurship competition at Imperial called We Innovate, which is designed for female entrepreneurs to go into this space. We entered what was, I would say, a preliminary version of the material technology that we are here at today. But across the later 2 years, we raised around £500,000 in grant funding, which allows us to further develop the products. But since then, I went full-time after we raised some investment. And since 2019, when I went full-time, we've raised around 10 million in funding across up to our seed round. And I was just thinking about the proportion that went into R&D before this panel. So around £4 million of that went into R&D across the last 5 years. Another 4 million went into the capex to build the first high-speed machinery line to be able to create these absorbent products. And then the remaining 2 million was across marketing expenses and operating expenses. You may have seen a couple of our ads around London the last couple of weeks, so that was from there.
Fantastic.
Thank
Thanks, Olivia.
Hi, everyone.
Last but not least, Julian.
Thank you. My name's Julian. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Saltico, and we develop biomaterials for the fashion industry. So we're creating next-generation textiles out of plants which are able to regenerate damaged wetlands. So I'll give a little bit of context as to what that is, and then I'll talk a bit about my Imperial journey as well. So the fashion industry is a long, long way off meeting its climate goals. It's got about over half a gigatons worth of carbon deficit that it's currently producing each year. And a recent study from McKinsey suggests that about 70% of the environmental impact of the fashion industry is coming from raw material sources, so the textiles that make up our clothes. And whilst there's been a lot of innovations in recent years in things like vegan leathers, in alternative cottons, or even some biosynthetics, one significant but hidden problem remains unsolved, and that is insulations. So everything from your Balenciaga super puffers to the padded jackets which power Silicon Valley, 2 billion puffer jackets will be made in 2023 and filled with carbon-heavy, damaging materials such as virgin polyester or goose down. And at Saltico, what we do is we take one of the most effective plants for regenerating damaged wetlands, which are currently emitting a huge amount of global carbon dioxide, and we have developed a patent-pending fiber processing technology which can extract fibers from those wetland regenerating plants and turn them into a next-generation fiber fill called BioPuff, which is lightweight, incredibly warm, and you can just swap out for goose down or virgin polyester instead. So that's what we do. Our journey started at Imperial. I did a postgraduate course there called Innovation Design Engineering, which actually is actually a really interesting course in it because it straddles both Imperial College London and the Royal College of Art. So you attend both universities simultaneously as part of this postgraduate degree. And there I met my 4 co-founders in my second year. We spent a lot of time at Imperial's White City lab campus looking at extracting different fibers from plants which grow in extreme environments such as wetlands. And then we started engaging with Imperial Enterprise Lab, which I think is really one of the powerhouses of Imperial's sort of entrepreneurship sort of support network. And since then, so this was back in May 2020, and since then we've had huge amounts of support from there. So we entered the Venture Catalyst Challenge, which is run by Imperial Enterprise Lab, and won £10,000. That was our first sort of money into the company. We then went on to join their mentor support network as well, which got us our first sort of mentors. They've provided us with legal support when we've needed. I went to New York to meet investors. We're currently raising our seed round just a couple of months ago. So they've been unbelievably supportive throughout, both sort of just generally and when we've sort of hit crisis points as well. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, but I see here that for some reason there aren't any questions popping up here. And so it seems as if either people haven't asked their questions on this or this is not working. But let me go ahead and ask one set of questions first. If you could log in and ask your questions there, I'll be able to weave them in. But if it doesn't show up anything in the next round, then we'll just go back to the traditional way of doing it, which is raising hands. You know, we are in the finance panel here, the finance forum in some sense, and all of you have been experiencing in some way, shape or form kind of an understanding or an engagement with where financiers are sitting. Obviously, there's a much greater awareness around climate challenges, the opportunities that can come from building successful climate businesses, but they still often have many of these properties that are not as attractive as an enterprise software company. They don't have high margins, they don't have recurring revenue, they're asset heavy, they take long amounts of time to build. And so what have your conversations been like with investors? Who are the kinds of people who have been engaging more deeply with you, and sort of how have you been navigating those challenges? And maybe I'll start with Olivia, because you've been kind of furthest along at it in some sense.
Yes. It's been really interesting. I would like to preface this by saying that a lot of my conversations with financiers were through warm relationships. So the warm relationships and introductions. So there was a pre-vetting sort of, I would say, stage done by our closer network. I would sort of approach that question in sort of 2 fronts. I think geographically, financiers from either an American background or an Asian background have a very different approach to British investors. And then the second sort of bucket that I would do is sort of, we've approached both, we've had investment from both institutional funding, but also angel investors, private equity, as well as family funds. And so how those have affected us in terms of how we're approaching that. I would say before I preface any external funding, I would encourage any of those in this who are looking at entrepreneurship to really explore all the free free money that you can before you even consider equity. So for us, we've done the Innovate UK, which does require a certain amount of match funding, but also through Imperial and a lot of these accelerator challenges. So I would encourage you to maximize a lot of that before you go to speak to these financiers. In the conversations with these institutional investors, I would say that the American investors that I've spoken to, I would say those in Silicon Valley on the sort of West Coast and also in New York on the East Coast, have felt like their appreciation of how long the timeline it takes for sort of climate tech and deep tech is a lot more forgiving than the conversations that I was having with institutional British investors, both in the sense that but perhaps it's with the introduction of the American IRA, whilst that, focus on the battery and, reduction of inflation, there isn't that sort of, I would say, clarity, perhaps, from the British reflection as to where we want to focus that amount of climate tech. Perhaps that's some of the naivety and some of the kind of people that I was speaking to, but that was my reflection on the sort of conversations that I was having. Conversely, when I was speaking to overseas investors, for example, Hong Kong or Chinese or Singaporean investors, their approach to climate tech and deep tech was very much tied to profit. However, because the company that we have is, like you say, is asset heavy, but it also gives some sort of reassurance. There's 40 foot of steel that you can touch and see that spits out 600 pads per minute that you'll be able to be like, okay, well, if we find a good commercial offer, this is something that we'll be able to make money back in the longer term, rather than it all going onto operations. So I found that sort of balance of risk was different based on the sort of geographies of the institutional investors that I spoke to. Here in the UK, closer to home, I found that the angel investors, right at the beginning of our pre-seed, our total pre-seed round was £500,000. It was led by a UK VC, but we had a lot of angels who partook. And pretty much the profile, a lot of those British angel investors were either ex-founders or people who were in the early stage sort of founding employees of these companies like Pucker Herbs, Yeo Valley, Natracare, all of these sort of FMCG, CPG companies that have understood and sort of lived through those experiences. One thing that I would suggest, though, is if you're looking to do sort of larger rounds, to syndicate those angel investors under an angel syndicate as you do progress, just to tidy up your cap table as you go forward. But I would say the value add of these individuals and in angel investors, both seated and rooted within the UK economy for any British converters or pulp manufacturers, was incredibly useful for us. So I would say it's looking at the value of the addition of the investor as well as, of course, the financial aspect of it.
Fantastic. Anyone want to chime in, add anything to that very comprehensive assessment?
I'll just echo perhaps a couple of those points, especially on the kind of on leveraging some of the grant funding that is around within the UK. Both things like Innovate UK, we've benefited from what's called smart grants, which are just very generalized grant funding methods for R&D, but there's also specific funds as well. So if you actually integrate yourself within the kind of public infrastructure as well, so we work quite a lot with DEFRA and Natural England, then there will be specific funds which are created for projects to help them meet their kind of goals internally as well, and that's how we've managed to leverage quite a lot of funding. We did our, we raised about 400,000 in pre-seed, but we've been running 3 years with like an 8-person team, and it's because we've managed to leverage about 1.7 million in non-dilutive funding as well, which really sort of motivates us to sort of move along. I don't think I can add much more in terms of interacting with investors and VCs as well, except that, and I kind of give this advice to any sort of startup that's sort of that's just starting, or a founder who's looking to raise money, is to find another startup which is perhaps a year or 2 years ahead of you and ask them all the questions. Don't ask the well-established Series A or Series B startup, because the financial landscape has moved far too far since they raised as well, and the ones that's just raised a couple of years ahead will be where the real insights are.
There's a question here for you about what kind of modeling and forecasting did you do when you spoke to raise the seed round? I'll let you respond, and then maybe I'll give my professional thoughts as a professor teaching some of this stuff.
So, um, an another grant fund we got, something called the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, which is another Natural England thing. We've actually worked over the past year with a company called Finance Earth, who are a fantastic consultancy and also fund within the UK looking at how you finance the regeneration of natural environment. And we've actually worked with them to build a financial model around our supply chain, which is brand new, it doesn't exist. We're having to see how we can regenerate damaged wetlands and have that, and then produce a product that comes out of the other end of that, our biopuff insulation, and make it cheaper than what is currently out there on the market, which is a real challenge. One of the ways that we make that possible is we've explored what we call kind of a stacked revenue model for agriculture and regenerating damaged land. So it's not just looking at, okay, we're going to farm this crop, we're going to harvest it, and then pay the farmer the money for that. It's also looking at how can we integrate MRV and some of these ecosystem services into the supply chain itself. So looking at stuff like carbon credits from the regeneration of the land, biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality from what the plants are able to do to strip out excess nutrients in the soils as well. And what that means is we can offer farmers a better deal, reduce the cost of our crop itself and our harvest, and enable us to make better returns. So we have done quite a lot of financial modeling. However, I will just say at the end of all of that, we're at kind of a seed level of funding. Most investors will be looking for much, I would say, fairly much more simplistic sort of measurements rather than this sort of really in-depth detailed analysis. They just want to see good thinking and that you're going to be able to, and they want to know, like, what's your Series A going to look like? So when you're at Series A, what are those things that you need to have proven?
Yeah, I might just elaborate on 2 or 3 things that you said,
Sure.
which I think were very spot on. The first is that particularly if you're looking for risk capital, venture capital investors, they're not looking for the most likely outcome, which of course is failure, right? 60% of venture deals fail. What they want to see is that you have an understanding of what it would take to make an incredibly successful business, but at the same time understand what are some of the things that are likely to go wrong along the way, and that you have a path to try to understand whether those are going to happen or not. So you're always telling 2 stories. One is, what's the end game? Why is this exciting? Why would you make a lot of money if everything worked out? And then the second is, how am I going to learn along the way about all the things that I need to learn to make sure that the end game is going to actually turn out the way it is? And as Julian said, you raise in stages. There's a set of things you need to learn at the very early stage, and then the next set of investors will need to see that you've learned those in order to give you the next amount of money. So understanding what your next investors are looking for is very important for you to build your seed round of financing, because that's the amount of time you're buying to learn what they need to see. Yeah, go for it.
I'd love to offer just a thought on this, because a big thing that I learned as I was going through a couple of rounds of funding was I approached the forecast initially as a part of the due diligence, but now as part of our last round of funding, I found it was one of the most important documents that allowed me to understand the people that I was inviting onto the cap table, what they would prioritize over the next 5 years. And for us, we had 3 different types of forecasts. One which was extremely R&D heavy, one which was focusing extracting on essentially different geography sort of scaling, and another one which is essentially applying our existing technology into an alternative industry. But there are all different ways of growing the company and scaling it. But using that document, the forecast, as a tool to, I would essentially have a really good discussion with potential board members or potential key investors to understand, once they come onto the cap table, where are their incentives lying, where are their priorities, and ensuring that over the next 5 years you're going to have a good relationship with the people that you bring on, because you understand it. You don't all have to agree, but as long as the priorities are aligned and they understand the different levers to pull. I just found it an extremely useful document that I didn't recognize the importance of in my earlier funding rounds.
Fantastic. Anything the 2 of you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, you was talking about particularly using that document for external conversations. We're just sort of going through putting together our seed round now, and we use it hugely internally to have arguments and use it, almost as a business planning tool, right? So looking at what are the implications of each stage, and I find using that forecasting is quite a nice way of doing it. It's a nice focal point to work around. Um, I think in a few conversations we've had with investors and people who have loads of knowledge in that space, I mean, the forecasting itself, the actual numbers you're getting out of it almost doesn't matter too much. What the investors want to see is the way you're thinking. Are you making valid assumptions? Have you thought of all of the things you should be thinking of? And I mean, that's quite powerful in itself because it doesn't give you any excuse of, oh, I can't do it yet because I don't have that piece of data. You sit down, you write whatever number in, and then as you progress sort of either through a single round or across rounds and you get a bit more certainty, you flesh out those numbers a little bit more, you get this more and more certainty. um, so that with a combination of sort of good sensitivity analysis, particularly in the current climate, looking at raw material costs and things like that is really at the front of everyone's mind. Looking at our business in sort of construction, making heavy materials, you have a lot going in and out. And if the price of our raw material doubles overnight, sadly, that's not unlikely anymore. And it's really important to see that the business can still be viable, or if it's not, what pivoting do you have to do to ensure that it can be, just to convince your investors that there is a long-term future for this business.
I will give a quick take jumping on Julian's thought of pairing with some founder later in their startup journey. At the end of the day, these are all learnings that you do with experience. And if you don't have that experience, not only is more difficult, but you'll also end up being less successful. Because at the end of the day, whether you get funding or not, it depends by the majority by your product, but also depends on whether you are able to talk with investors. And part of what we are trying to do at our pre-accelerator and at Imperial in general is sharing that knowledge from experienced people to less experienced people. And by doing that, you make people more ready to take on these important steps that require experience. And thus, you increase the number of success of your spin-outs, which I think is something that as you experienced people should focus on and to make sure that the climate startups have more success.
All right, there's another question here that's quite interesting, which is, what would you like larger organizations to do to engage more with academia and small startups? So let me offer two specific things that I think would be interesting, and then you can add in other ones. So one, of course, is that large companies often have the industrial plants, processes, technologies to run pilots, which can be incredibly valuable for small startups because they don't have to make all the capital investments themselves. The second is they can provide real-world feedback on whether this particular solution is a solution to something that they think is a real problem, or whether there is whether it's a solution to something that's more niche and isn't going to necessarily move the needle from an investor standpoint. So an investor would love to see validation from large companies as initial pilot customers to say, you know what, we've tried this out. This actually works doesn't just work in the academic lab. It works in the real world at perhaps at small scale, and it's actually solving a real problem that we have. So those kinds of validations are incredibly valuable from a corporate standpoint. But I'd be curious, particularly, you've had probably numerous conversations with construction companies, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this.
No, it's that second point you made, which I'd really like to highlight and sort of push a bit further. In many ways, the science and the technological development is the easy bit, right? And it's almost too easy to develop a technology within a lab which just doesn't translate to the real world for whatever reason. And you see it all the time in academia. You can get sort of senior professors with their heads down, spending 10, 15 years developing this technology. They're like, right, it's perfect. Time to take it out there to the wider world. and the first person looks at it and goes, no chance. It won't work for 17 pages of reasons. So for us, that was a really big thing. I don't see myself as an academic. I just happen to have ended up in a university by a set of circumstances. But engagement really, really early with industry, and ensuring that we're sort of giving them the product they want, the services they want, is key. So I think that's the most powerful thing that big players can do is be willing to engage really early, and don't just think of it as, okay, we'll let them develop the technology and then we'll just jump in as soon as it's market ready, and take the credit for rolling out this brilliant new sustainable thing. Get in at TRL 1, 2 and guide it as much as you can.
And maybe you could give a specific example about, because I think your cement is interesting because it's very compliant with the way in which the industry works. So I'm giving you an opportunity to really
So
sell yourself.
I mean, construction is sort of easy because you've got all of these paths working together, right? You've got the cement supplier to build it, and the structural engineers design it. The architects design sort of the aesthetics of it. And really making sure that you're ticking all of the boxes for all of these players is hugely important for us. So, cement and concrete sustainable is a hugely crowded market now. But you look at a few of them and you go, well, you can't for in situ concrete, so that hugely limits the market. Or you need really fancy tubes, you need CO2 or something.
Yeah.
Is my Does that work? No?
Just turn my mic on.
It would be me. Hello? Hello?
Just turn me on. Just turn me on.
I'll just take that. Okay. It would be me, wouldn't it? I've completely forgotten what I was saying.
Why your product?
Oh, yeah, yes. So you need to look at these core things. As I said, like fancy curing regimes, you see lots of CO2 cured concretes. It's a nice invention. It's a nice, neat way of using CO2, but it just doesn't really translate to the wider world. So that was such a focus for us from day one of get the industry involved, make sure you're making a normal sort of product based on familiar chemistries and all of this. And that wouldn't have been possible at all without industry engagement. So, it's kind of a thank you for the industry as well, for the partners we've been fortunate enough to work with. But even so, we've still come up with some companies, I won't name names, who have been much more skeptical, much more difficult to work with. So that would be, if you're sitting here from a big corporate now looking to engage with the university, do it as early as possible, except you might not always, get something useful out of every engagement, but the ones you do will be so much more valuable.
I would say. Okay. Can you hear me? Great. So I would add a new point of view about the relationship between big companies and climate innovation, and that would be that everybody knows that big companies suffer from the innovator's dilemma. Every company tries to address it by doing innovation in-house. However, climate innovation is radically different than traditional innovation, as in it requires a lot of R&D, and it also requires innovators to follow undiscovered paths, which are most of the time unconventional, and which are scary to take on from big companies. At the same time, you have universities, people that are exploring new paths. Okay, maybe the professor that worked 15 years might have developed something that's not economically viable, but at the same time, there will be other two professors and PhDs that have discovered radically new ways to do certain things in a much more climate-friendly way. So companies are currently really interested in the university spin-outs and innovation at universities because it gives them the ability to connect to radically new technologies. And this is something that we should exploit more.
Yes, and if you're interested in engaging with Imperial, please be in touch with me. Okay, so I think we have just a few more minutes. We have time, or 2 minutes actually, so we have time for one question. The gentleman there wants to get a mic.
I'd like to understand a little bit about the Imperial commercial model for spin-outs, yeah? Because obviously you're all employed by, you're paid for a while as a professor, you're being paid a salary. The college might be paying a lot of money into patents, filing patents. Your student, though that obviously that relationship's changed a bit with you paying for that pleasure. But how does what's the commercial model for spin-outs and what's the percentage, etc., how it's shared out? Thank you.
Sure. So, as you point out, there's a big difference between students and staff. Students own all the IP that they create, and so Imperial will not take a single percentage point of equity in a student startup. When it comes to faculty-led ventures, Imperial does, as you say, pay a salary, pay patent fees, provide a lot of the kit, discounted equipment, and in cases like what we've been doing with Ceratech, will provide several £100,000 of non-dilutive financing that will be non-additionally dilutive to the amount of equity that Imperial takes. I think we pride ourselves at being at the more founder-friendly end of the range. Universities like Oxford started off at 50%, are down now to 20%. Imperial is between the 10 and 20% range. It's more common for biomedical companies to give up a larger share of the equity, but in the climate sphere, it's more towards the 10% end of the range. So I think that's about all that we have time for today. Thank you very much for your engagement. Thank you to the panelists for an excellent job, and enjoy the rest of your day here.